Welcome. Today I'm going to be discussing the history of socialism, part three. I'd like to start off with Saul Alinsky. He rode around Chicago with Al Capone's hitman Frank Nitti and saw how all he had to do was kill a few people, smash a few windows, and the entire neighborhood would become fearful and agree to pay the mob protection money. Alinsky adapted this into his political technique of community organizing. In 1969, Hillary Clinton's senior thesis at Wesleyan College, Wellesley College was titled There is Only One Fight, an analysis of the Alinsky model. It was based on Saul Alinsky's book, A Revel for Radicals. That's 1946. Barack Obama taught Alinsky's rules for radicals in 1971, beginning his political career as a community organizer in Chicago. Alinsky taught how to identify tension, fault lines in society, real or perceived injustices into emotional flames, to fan them into emotional flames. And when they reach a boiling point and anarchy breaks out, everyone is so desperate to have order restored that they will knee-jerk reaction relinquish their rights. He wrote in Rules for Radicals, the first step in community organization is community disorganization. The disruption of the present organization is the first step. The organizer must first rub raw the resentments of people of the community, fan the latent hostilities of many of the people to the point of overt expression. He must search out controversy and issues rather than avoid them. For unless there is controversy, people are not concerned enough to act. The organizer's first job is to create the issues or problems. An organizer must stir up dissatisfaction and discontent, provide a channel into which people can angrily pour their frustrations. The organizer polarizes the issue. The organizer helps lead his forces into conflict. The real arena is corrupt and bloody in a war that end justifies almost any means. In the arena of action, a threat or crisis becomes almost a precondition. Arthur David Horowitz explained, an SDS radical once wrote, "The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution, battles over rights and over other issues. According to Alinsky, should never be seen as more than occasions to advance the real agenda, which is the accumulation of power." Toward a Soviet America is a book written by American communist leader William Z. Foster in 1932. Foster described it in its preface as a plain statement of communist policy, avoiding technical complexities and theoretical elaboration. Its central purpose is to explain how the oppressed and exploited masses of workers and poor farmers, how under the leadership of the Communist Party, they can best protect themselves now and in due season cut their way out of the capitalist jungle to socialism. So he has chapters with titles called The Decline of Capitalism, The Rise of Socialism, The Capitalist Attempts to Liquidate the Crisis, The Revolutionary Way Out of the Crisis, The United Soviet States of America, various things like that. Cleon Skousen, who was on the staff with FBI, put together 45 current communist goals, which have been followed right down to the present. First, get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get controls of teachers' associations. Put the party line in the textbooks. Gain control of all student newspapers. Use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. Infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, policy-making positions. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. Continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. American Communist Cell was told to eliminate all good sculpture from parks and buildings, substitute shapeless, awkward, and meaningless forms, eliminate all laws governing obscenity and calling them censorship, in violation of free speech and free press, present homosexuality, degeneracy, promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy, discredit the Bible, Emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious clutch. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in schools on the grounds that it violates a principle of separation of church and state. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. Discredit American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the big picture. Discredit the family as an institution, encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of their parents. Crises were important. Whether created or coincidental, they can be consistently capitalized upon to create control. Some crises include AIDS crisis, anthrax crisis, avian flu crisis, mad cow disease crisis, West Nile virus crisis, swine flu crisis, E. coli crisis, SARS crisis, MERS crisis, Ebola crisis, prescription drug crisis, health crisis, Y2K crisis, national debt crisis, subprime mortgage crisis, unemployment crisis, 9/11, ISIS, terrorism crisis, Patriotic Act and NSA crisis, oil embargo crisis, oil spill crisis, environmental crisis, global warming crisis, climate change crisis, North Korean missile crisis, and continues on. BLM, Black Lives Matter, Ferguson riots, Baltimore riots, Charlotte riots, March on Our Lives, Confederate statues protests. Crises may be psychologically induced. Students needing safe places so as not to be traumatized by hearing triggering views, being offended by microorganisms, microaggressions, intersectionally, or hearing wrong pronouns, hateful organizations, projecting their hate onto innocent opponents, intolerant Sharia adherents claiming to be victims of intolerance, violent peace demonstrators or aggressive social justice activists, school or other shootings capitalized upon to advance political agendas, predictions of fearful climate crisis with urgent deadlines that pass unfulfilled, or virus pandemic crises with disproportionate responses of economic shutdowns, governor-ordered home confinement and church designation of non-essential. The media irresistibly exacerbates crises to an urgency where people almost believe the world will end. Crises can be used to advance a political agenda. John F. Kennedy cautioned in April 1961, we as a people inherently and historically opposed to secret societies. We are opposed around the world by a ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence on infiltration, tightly knit, highly efficient political operations. Eisenhower spoke in Abilene's Plaza Theater on June 16, 1952. Any kind of communistic, subversive influence must be uprooted from the responsible places in our government. At a college of William and Mary in 1953, Eisenhower stated, it is necessary that we earnestly seek out and uproot any traces of communism at any place where it can affect our national life. If we had known communist in our faculty, he could not be discharged. I was automatically discharged. I went to the Columbia University. His president insisted on one thing, that if I had known communists in our faculty, he could not be discharged. I personally would not be a party to an organization where there was a known card-carrying communist in such responsible position as teaching our young Lyndon B. Johnson, who supported Franklin Roosevelt's collectivist New Deal programs, which he later expanded with his Great Society welfare. Prior to his re-election to a Senate, a 501c3 nonprofit committee for the constitutional government circulated a pamphlet in 1954 calling out Johnson. In the pamphlet, Willis Ballinger wrote, "A vote for Johnson, many Texans feel, will be a vote for more centralization of power and socialism in Washington." for more internationalism, which is designated to abolish the United States of America. And for more covering up of the communist infiltration, Johnson wanted to silence this group, so he proposed the IRS censor the freedom of speech of 501c3 nonprofit organizations from speaking out on topics politics. A person who used legal means to advance socialist goals in America was Roger Baldwin, one of the founders of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. Roger Baldwin graduated from Harvard in 1905. The editor of the Harvard College class of 35th anniversary yearbook sent him a questionnaire to which Baldwin replied with a statement echoing Lenin's phrase, "The goal of socialism is communism. I am for socialism, disarmament, and ultimately for abolishing the state itself as an instrument of violence and compulsion. I seek social ownership of property, the abolition of propertied class, the sole control of those who produce wealth. Communism is the goal." Baldwin twice visited the Soviet Union, embraced Vietnamese communist dictator Ho Chi Minh. In Liberty Under the Soviets, he unapologetically defended the communist hypocrisy. Communists aid the workers in capitalist countries in the fullest possible expression of their class while suppressing the Russian and working class. To communists, there is no inconsistency in denying civil liberties to all opponents of Soviet Russia, while demanding these liberties for the moment for their movement in capitalist countries. He concluded, I don't regret being a part of communist tactic, which increased the effectiveness of a good cause. I knew what I was doing. I was not an innocent liberal. I wanted what communists wanted. The California Senate Fact-Finding Committee on Un-American Activities stated in 1948, the ACLU may definitely be classified as a communist front or transmission belt organization. At least 90% of its efforts are on behalf of communists who have come under conflict with the law. The Communist Party of the United States is an organization unique in American history. It is not a true political party. It differs fundamentally from all political parties in this country. It is, in fact, a Russian-inspired, Moscow-dominated military conspiracy against our government, our ideals, and our freedoms. In 1950, members of the Communist Party USA formed a Mattachine Society, the nation's first homosexual rights organization, which lobbied to repeal sodomy laws. Other organizations followed. Black Lives Matter website. We Make Peace for Transgender and work to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift trans folk, especially trans women. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families in villages that we collectively care for children. We foster quill-affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all the world are heterosexual. Ruth Bader Ginsburg became a director of the ACLU in 1972. Bill Clinton appointed her to the Supreme Court in 1993. The ACLU opposed the Bible, as Reagan told the national religious broadcasters in 1984. I was pleased last year to proclaim 1983 the year of the Bible. But a group called the ACLU severely criticized me for doing that. Well, I wear the indictment with a badge of honor. Franklin Roosevelt warned delegates of the American Youth Congress in February 10th of 1940, some of you are communists. You have no American right, by act or deed, or any kind to subvert the government and the Constitution of this nation. Eisenhower made a reference to the ACLU reference in Time magazine. The Bill of Rights contains no grant of privilege for a group of people to destroy the Bill of Rights. A group like the Communist Conspiracy dedicated to the ultimate destruction of civil liberties cannot be allowed to claim civil liberties as its privileged sanctuary from which to carry out subversion of the government. Eisenhower's view could likewise be a warning against Sharia law Islam, namely the extending of civil liberties to groups whose goal is to establish a fundamental Islamic system which denies civil liberties to non-Muslims. Recently, Mark Levin interviewed Ted Cruz about his new book, one vote away. What Ted Cruz said was chilling. With 4 committed liberal judges on the court who have voted for the plenary power to limit political speech, complete confiscation of all firearms from the public, and total loss of religious liberty, one more vote could cause Americans to lose most of their rights that we take for granted. The argument against Amy Coney Barrett is on the loss of pre-existing conditions in healthcare. According to Ted, they don't dare deal with her Catholic faith or her view on abortion. What could happen if Amy Barrett is what happened to Bork in 1987, Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh? All of these had horrible attacks from Democrats after they had been nominated to the Supreme Court. One more liberal vote could change America forever. The liberals do not believe in democracy. Advocacy journalism, unfreedom of the press, is about those who entrusted the news reporting in the modern media and are destroying the freedom of the press from within. Not government oppression or suppression, not President Donald Trump's finger pointing, but present-day newspapers and newsrooms, journalists, indeed social activism, progressive groupthink, democratic partisanship, opinion and propaganda passed on as news, the staging of pseudo-events, self-censorship, bias by omission, and outright falsehoods are too often substituted for old-fashioned objective fact-gathering and news reporting. The self-perpetuating and reinforcing mindset has replaced independent and impartial thinking. All the people, most of the American people know it. Thus, the credibility of the mass media has never been lower. Unlike earlier patriot press, today's newsrooms and journalists are mostly hostile to America's founding principles, traditions, and institutions. They don't promote free speech, freedom of the press. Despite the self-serving and self-righteous claims, indeed, they serve as societal filters attempting to enforce uniformity of thought and social and political activism centered on the progressive ideology and agenda. Issues, events, groups, and individuals that do not fit the narrative are dismissed or diminished. Those that do fit the narrative are elevated and celebrated. Of course, the paradigm greatly influences the culture, the government, the national psyche. It defines media-created reality, whether or not it has a basis in true reality around which individuals organize their thoughts, beliefs, and in some cases their lives. It bears remembering that the purpose of the free press, like the purpose of free speech, is to nurture the mind, communicate ideas, challenge ideologies, share notions, inspire creativity, advocate and reinforce America's founding principles. That is, to contribute to a vigorous, productive, healthy, and happy individual and to a well-functioning civil society and republic. Moreover, the media are to expose official actions aimed at squelching speech and communication. But when the media function as a propaganda tool for a single political party or ideology, they not only destroy their own purpose, but threaten the existence of a free republic. Not long after the nation's founding, President Adams and his Federalist Party instituted a Sedition Act of 1798. It made illegal the following: to write, print, or utter, or publish, or cause to be done, or assist in it of any false, scandalous, or miscellaneous writing against the government of the United States, or either House of Congress, or the President, with the intent to defame, or bring either into contempt or disrepute, or to excite against either the hatred of the people of the United States, or to stir up sedition, or to excite unlawful combinations against the government, or to resist it, or to aid or encourage hostile design of foreign nations. Numerous opponents of President Wilson's war policies were charged and imprisoned. Indeed, Wilson had already instituted extensive measures to curtail freedom of the press. The Associated Press found that Obama administration used the 1917 Espionage Act with unprecedented vigor, prosecuting more people under the law for leaking sensitive information to the public than all previous modern administrations combined. President Trump, however, did not pose a threat to freedom of the press, as it did certain of his predecessors. Newsroom and journalists were not imperiled by him. There were no known Sedition Act efforts attacking speech and freedom of the press. no executive orders imprisoning reporters or shutting down newspapers, no FCC actions against broadcast stations, no unprecedented criminal charges against media organizations or reporters, no omnipresent propaganda operations. Nonetheless, the constant media refrain, whether from journalists or from editorialists, trying to convince the American people of a demonstrably false narrative that President Trump has launched an unprecedented battering on the freedom of our press, thereby undermining the credibility of the institution. Advocacy journalism is a genre of journalism that adopts a non-objective viewpoint, usually from some social or political purpose. Democratic nations boast that the citizens agree upon what they agree on is law. But is that the case? In reality, those who control what information the citizens receive are really in control. Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, explained in his book Propaganda how public relations used by businesses to get public to buy certain products have been adapted to get the public to adapt political views. Today, the minority has discovered a powerful help in influencing the majority to mold the mind of the masses. They find in propaganda a tool which is increasingly powerful, regimenting the public mind. It has a domino effect. The country is controlled by laws. Laws are controlled by politicians. Politicians are controlled by voters. Voters are controlled by public opinion. And public opinion is controlled by media, education, and internet censorship. Therefore, whoever controls the media, education, and internet controls the country. There's a computer term, GIGO, garbage input, garbage output. Social planners have discovered that by controlling what information goes into the voters' minds, they can determine the outcome of how they vote. Joseph Goebbels, a master in manipulation, stated it is an absolute right of the state to supervise the formation of public opinion. Think of the press as a great keyboard in which the government can play. False experts are used, as noted in A Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media by Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky. The propaganda model also incorporates experts, quote unquote experts, to confirm the official slant on the news, taken for granted by the media personnel and the elite, but they're often resisted by the general population. Pope John Paul II stated in 1993, vast sectors of society are confused about what is right and wrong, and are at the mercy of those with the power to create opinion and impose it on others. Will and Ariel Durant, in his excellent book on history, Lessons in History, he says, ignorance lends itself to manipulation by forces that mold the public opinion. Orwell wrote in his book 1984, in the long run, a hierarchical society was only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. Thomas Sowell, senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, stated, ours may become the first civilization destroyed, not by the power of our enemies, but by the ignorance of our teachers and the dangerous nonsense they are teaching our children. In the age of artificial intelligence, they are creating artificial stupidity. Hegel wrote in Philosophy of Law that public opinion deserves to be esteemed as much as to be despised. The definition of freedom of the press as freedom to say and write what one pleases, such a view belongs to the uneducated, crudity and superficial of naive thinking. Controlled media can favor or malign candidates. It can even spread false polling data prior to an election to prepare students or citizens to accept the results of a voter fraud. On May 28, 2020, President Trump signed an executive order to curb internet tech censorship. They've had unchecked power to censor, restrict, edit, shape, hide, alter, virtually any form of communication between private citizens or large public audiences. There's no precedent in American history for so small a number of corporations to control so large a sphere of interaction. The choices that Twitter makes when it chooses to suppress, edit, blacklist, shadow ban are editorial decisions, pure and simple. The U.S. Attorney General William Barr stated these companies grew because they held themselves out as public forums. Now they've become these very powerful networks. They've switched and they are using the market power to force particular viewpoints. Solzhenitsyn stated at Harvard, June 8, 1978, the press, the media, enjoys the widest freedom. If they mislead the public, if they have misled the public opinion by inaccurate information or wrong conclusions, even if they have contributed to mistakes on a state level, we do know of any case of open regret or voiced by any journalist of the same newspaper? No. A nation may be worse for such a mistake, but a journalist always gets away with it. Rumors and suppositions settle into a reader's memory. The press can act the role of public opinion or miseducated, terrorist, heroized, secret matters pertaining to the nation's defense publicly revealed. The press has become the greatest power within Western countries, exceeding that of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. General MacArthur stated in June 25, 1951, the scourge of imperialist communism has infiltrated into positions of public trust and responsibility into journalism, the press, the radio, the school. It seeks through covert manipulation of the civil power and media of public information and education to pervert the truth, impair respect for moral values, suppress human freedom and representative government, and in the end, destroy our faith in our religious teachings. The type of pressure which has caused many Christian nations to fall, there can be no compromise with atheistic communism, no halfway in the preservation of freedom and religion. It must be all or nothing. President William Harrison warned in 1841, as long as the understanding of men can be warped and their affections changed by operations upon their passions and prejudices, so long will the liberties of a people depend on the constant attention to its preservation. Washington warned in his farewell address in 1796, ambitious, corrupted, deluded citizens, facility to betray or sacrifice their interests of their own country, sometimes even with popularity. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence the public councils? Solzhenitsyn warned, there is a Russian proverb, the yes man is your enemy, but your friend will argue with you. I am the friend. I have come to tell you, one of your leading newspapers, after the end of Vietnam, had a full headline, The Blessed Silence. I would not wish that blessed silence on my worst enemy. I spent 11 years in archipelago labor camps. Washington predicted in his farewell address, real patriots who may resist the intrigues, Soviet plans of the favorite are liable to become suspect and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. President William Harrison compared spirit of liberty to counterfeit spirit of party. There are times with much difficulty in distinguishing the false from the true spirit. The calm investigation will detect the counterfeit. The true spirit of liberty is mild and tolerant and scrupulous, while the spirit of the party, assuming to be that of liberty, is harsh, vindictive, and intolerant and total reckless as to the character of its allies, which it brings to the aid of its cause. The reign of an intolerant spirit of party against a free people seldom fails to result in a dangerous accession to the executive power introduced and established amidst unusual professions of devotion to democracy. George Washington warned further, in contemplating the cause which may disturb the Union, parties which acquire influence to misrepresent the opinions and aims of others, you cannot shield yourself too much against the jealousies and heartburnings which spring from these misrepresentations. To put in the place of delegated will of the nation, the will of a party, often a small but artful, enterprising minority, there is likely, in the course of time and things, to become a potent engines by which the cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to the unjust dominion. Washington stated further, "Let me warn you that in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of liberty, this spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature. Having its roots in the strongest passions of the human mind, it exists under different shapes in all governments, but in those most popular form, their worst enemy, ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasionally riot and insurrection, domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to the party dissension, which in different ages and different countries has perpetuated the most horrid enormities, leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism." Martin Luther began his Reformation in 1917, having personal revelation of the verse, "The just shall live by faith." When the Austrian German kings wanted to break from Rome, they decided that everyone in their kingdom had to be a Lutheran. Pietists believed along that being a Christian was more than just acknowledging a new set of doctrines. As scriptural as they may be, a person needed to have a personal experience with Jesus. And when they do, the life would change by the indwelling power of the Holy Spirit. They would no longer do worldly things that they used to do, like go to bars, brothels, lewd theaters, or be involved in worldly government. Wait, what was that last term? Yes, government. The pietist attitude was, if someone was truly Christian, they would not be involved in government. As it was fulfilled, full of worldly people, there was an early version of separation of the church and state. Some pietists even refused to vote. Pietists stressed the positive and vital message of the personal relationship with Christ, but the emphasis was so personal that it abandoned responsibility to fulfill another scriptural command. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, Proverbs 13:22. There were accounts of German princes financially supporting pietists so that they would teach followers to stay out of the prince's business. This separation concept kept German churches silent, allowing ambitious politicians like Hitler to seize power. The church must be reminded that it is the conscience of the state. Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party usurped power and killed millions over 1,200 concentration camps. It took sacrifice of millions of courageous Allied lives to stop what German church leaders refused to do because they were silent and taught church members that it was more spiritual not to be involved in politics. Once in power, Hitler dispensed with the pretense and revealed his Nazified social Darwinism and hostility towards Christianity. Recent headlines reflect similar hostility. China trying to rewrite the Bible, forced churches to sing communist anthems. In China, they're closing churches, jailing pastors, even rewriting scripture. China's Communist Party is intensifying religious persecution as Christianity's popularity grows. Other recent examples: in Kansas, public health orders allowed people to go to bars and dine in public restaurants, but denied any church from gathering more than 10 people, even if they observed social distancing. In Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer issued draconian lockdown orders and used state police against peaceful protesters while allowing abortion clinics to stay open. Mayor in Greenville, Mississippi, declared it's a crime for people to sit alone in their cars in a church parking lot. The Department of Justice said the city appears to have thereby singled churches out as the only essential service that may not operate despite following recommendations regarding the social distancing. The Illinois governor announced that churches will be limited until a vaccine is developed. Massachusetts governor targeted churches for shutdown rules he didn't apply to the Home Depot. New York mayor broke up a Jewish funeral. Franklin D. Roosevelt stated December 1941, "To Hitler, the church is a monstrosity to be destroyed by every means." Hitler attempted to Nazify German Protestant churches. He pressured old military generals who might resist him to retire, thus purging his administration of any still retaining remnant of archaic Judeo-Christian values. Roosevelt stated in January of 1942, "The world is too small for both Hitler and God. Nazis have now announced their plan for enforcing their pagan religion all over the world, by which the Holy Bible and the Cross of Mercy would be displaced by Mein Kampf and the swastika. Roosevelt stated of Hitler in 1941, government to him is not a servant, but of the people, but their absolute master and the dictator of every act. The rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which seemed to the founders of the Republic inalienable, were to Hitler and his fellows empty words. FDR continued, Hitler advanced that individual freedom has no rights whatsoever to himself, no right to a soul of his own, or a mind of his own, or a tongue of his own, or a trait of his own, or even to live where he pleases, or to marry the woman he loves. That his only duty is the duty of obedience, not to his God, not to his conscience, but to Adolf Hitler. His only valve is his valve, not as a man, but as a unit of Nazi state. George Orwell observed that people not only want material things, they want purpose, even if it's a false one. They also, at least intermittently, want to struggle and self-sacrifice. Socialism said to the people, I offer you a good time. Hitler said to them, I offer you struggle, danger, and death. And as a result, the whole nation flings itself at his feet. We ought not to underrate the emotional appeal. Attorney General Bill Barr noted February 26, 2020, progressives have become increasingly militant and totalitarian. They seek power through democratic process. Their policy agenda has become more aggressively collectivist, socialist, and explicitly revolutionary. Stalin took away guns from his citizens in 1929 and murdered 20 million of his own people. Pol Pot took guns away from his citizens in 1956 and then murdered 2 million of them once defenseless. Hitler took guns away from his citizens in 1938 and then murdered 13 million of them once defenseless. Mao took guns away from his citizens in 1935 and then murdered 20 million of them once defenseless. Hitler began to confiscate weapons from law-abiding citizens. Disarming the civilian population was a necessary step in state control. As Lenin explained, one man with a gun can control 100 men without. George Mason, a Virginian founding father, wrote, to disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them. Noah Webster wrote, before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed. Machiavelli wrote, it's not reasonable to suppose that one who is armed will obey one who is unarmed, willingly obey one who is unarmed. And the North Koreans sentenced to labor camps disarmed Nigerians. Theoretical arguments for disarming citizens became indefensible when faced with actual situations. The disarmed Koreans sentenced to labor camps. Disarmed Nicaraguans killed by Islamist Boko Haram. Disarmed Iranians killed by their fundamentalist state. Disarmed Venezuelans killed by military forces of a corrupt dictator. When a suspected homosexual shot Nazi diplomat Ernest van Rath in Paris, it was used as an excuse to confiscate all firearms from Jews. This left Jewish neighborhoods defenseless, setting the stage for Jews to be maligned, rounded up, and eventually sent to concentration camps. German newspapers printed November 1938, Jews forbidden to possess weapons by order of the SS Reichsfuhrer Himmler, Munich. Persons who, according to the Nuremberg law, are regarded as Jews are forbidden to possess any weapon. Violators will be condemned to a concentration camp and imprisoned for a period of up to 20 years. The New York Times, November 9, 1938, reported the Berlin police announced that the entire Jewish population of Berlin had been disarmed with the confiscation of 2,569 hand weapons, 1,702 firearms, 20,000 rounds of ammunition. Any Jews still found in possession of weapons without valid licenses are threatened with severest punishment. In light of Nazi threats, George Orwell wrote in 1941, a million British workmen now have rifles in their bedrooms and don't in the least wish to give them up. In March 1938, Hitler stated at a dinner the most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subject to have arms. After World War II ended, officials in the National Socialist Workers' Party were arrested and put on trial for killing millions of Jews and others in the Holocaust. At Nuremberg trials, on full display was the socialist agenda of the rights come from the group and not God. Nazi officials defended their actions by explaining that they were only following the laws agreed upon by the people of the German state and the John Crow laws used by the Democratic Party to persecute blacks. An insight into the perpetrator's mindset was provided by Nazi General Hans Frank, who carried out orders to plunder Poland and commit the mass murder of millions of Poles and Jews in death camps. By turning away from God, we were overthrown and had to perish. Hans Frank continued, he said, before all, God pronounced and executed judgment on Hitler and the system which we served with minds far from God. Soviet infiltration tactics in Hollywood, media, education, politics, business, churches, seminaries have been confirmed by senior activist of the Soviet Union's foreign intelligence and first chief dictatorate of the KGB. Time magazine senior editor Whittaker Chambers confessed to being a Soviet spy. Chambers had joined the Communist Party in 1932 and worked with spies within Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal administration who leaked classified documents. When fellow Soviet spy Walter Krivitsky was found murdered in 1941, Chambers feared for his life and decided to give himself up. In 1948, Whittaker Chambers testified before House Un-American Activities Committee, naming 18 current former government employees who were communist spies or sympathizers. One of those was Elgar Hiss, who worked in Roosevelt's Department of Justice and State Department and who helped write the United Nations Charter. For his efforts in exposing spies, Chambers was posthumously awarded a Medal of Freedom by Ronald Reagan, who stated on March 6th, Whittaker Chambers understood the struggle between totalitarianism in the West. He himself had turned to communism out of a sense of idealism, in which he thought it might be the answer. And then he wrote, the communist vision is a vision of man without God. When men try to live in a world without God, it's only too easy for them to forget the rights of God that God bestows. Too easy to suppress freedom of speech, jail dissidents, and put great thinkers in mental wards. As more people exercise the right to vote, more tactics emerge to manipulate voters, including media ignoring, censoring, publishing fake news about a candidate, persuading more candidates to run to divide the opposing party's vote base, getting more voters to become dependent on government entitlement handouts, fear-mongering that voters might lose entitlements, street money to pay people to vote, psychological projection where a candidate guilty of a crime accuses their opponent of committing it, October surprise, the week before the November elections, including planned political attack ads, mailers saved up as shocking revelations, prepared breaking news stories to grab the headlines and disrupt the momentum of a winning candidate, or engineered financial distress and national emergencies intend to alter the outcome of an election, race baiting, Black Panther, Black Lives Matters, Antifa violence, or intimidation at the polls using community organizer agitators and agenda provocateurs to incite riots. In addition to silencing opposing viewpoints, there are many ways to manipulate the counting of votes. Joseph Stalin remarked in 1923, I consider it completely unimportant in who the party will vote or how, but what is extraordinarily important is who will count the votes and how. Would politicians stoop to voter fraud? A question to ponder is if a politician can justify agenda which will including unborn babies, is there anything that a politician could not justify? What is lying, cheating, slander, or voter fraud in comparison to that? And Saul Alinsky wrote, in war, the end justifies any means. That's the end of session 3.